they kind of show you, like you said, behind the curtain, and in the training, they have people yelling at them, clench your butt, clench your legs, clench your ab, because you have to flex all your muscles basically to keep the blood reaching your brain. The cost of F-18 Super Hornet, which is what they're flying since 2021, can be up to $66 million.
They're out there
practicing
all the time. They were saying the amount of commitment and time. I mean, they would say they'd be up like 2 or 3 times a day in the planes. They were saying they're doing 15-hour days.
Well, I think that's the idea of putting forth this pinnacle example. I think it's a lead by example ethos. Yeah. Look, this is excellence. This is what we stand for. This is the top. And you want to come do this too?
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hello.
This is going to be our Blue Angels episode. Somewhat appropriately, we are recording this on June 6th, which is the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Indeed.
So guys, we watched this Amazon Prime documentary on the Blue Angels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well filmed, just really cool.
Cool music, cool scenes of the Blue Angels doing cool stunts, which is, that's what they do. Yeah, it was a good watch for sure. Let's just start with, what were your thoughts from the documentary?
I really liked the style in which it was filmed. I think it really captured the attitude and like the culture of what the Blue Angels are and the elite nature, but also the camaraderie that is evident in what they have there. This, storied and elite brotherhood and sisterhood of aviation.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It is very cool. Thomas?
I enjoyed the look behind the curtain, as it were, understanding a bit of the history of how the Blue Angels came into being. I thought that was interesting. It is a very specialized elite group, and how they choose who's going to become a Blue Angel.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. And you know this, I guess maybe you don't think about it because you're focusing on the jet and maybe the pilots, but all the surrounding individuals that are involved in the process of making
the support
that happen.
Team.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting to kind of see a little bit of a glimpse of as well.
Yeah. My biggest takeaways were, I was interested to find out just how physical a job being a Blue Angel pilot is.
Yeah.
Because they kind of show you, like you said, behind the curtain, and in the training, they have people yelling at them, clench your butt, clench your legs, clench your ab, because you have to flex all your muscles basically to keep the blood reaching your brain. Otherwise, the G-forces will make it pool at your feet and you'll pass out, which is really bad when you're flying a $50 million jet.
Yeah, an arm's length distance away from your wingman.
Yeah, I think they probably don't pull all that many Gs when they're in that close formation. But yeah. And then the other thing that I was really struck by was just, goodness gracious, y'all, the U.S. military is just on another level.
Yes.
We can afford to have 6, and I looked it up, and the cost of F-18 Super Hornet, which is what they're flying since 2021, can be up to $66 million.
For a single aircraft.
For a single aircraft. And they're flying 6 of these.
And also, the thing is, those are the older airframes too.
Right. These are not the brand newest. They have made the upgrade to, they're a little bit closer to what we're using today than they usually are, because they just upgraded in 2021. But they'll keep flying these F-18 Super Hornets for quite a long time.
Yeah, I wonder they don't get into this at all, but the cost per show, which actually probably isn't that much than it is every single day for them, because they're out there
practicing
all the time. They were saying the amount of commitment and time. I mean, they would say they'd be up like 2 or 3 times a day in the planes. They were saying they're doing 15-hour days regularly.
Right. Yeah. I think they said they would fly, like you said, 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And then lots of time just sitting around
debriefing,
reviewing every little thing that happens, because they have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because and they literally describe in their closest formation, if they were able to stretch their arm up out of the cockpit, full length, they would be touching the wing of the plane above them.
That's just mind-boggling.
So, there is no room for error
Zero.
At that level. So they work incredibly hard to be able to pull that off.
Yeah.
And it's not even for protecting America. Like, they could, but that's not what their job is. Their job is to promote the U.S. Navy aircraft, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they said. The reason they were invented was Admiral Nimitz after World War II wanted to make sure that the naval air guys and the fact that the Navy has airplanes was remembered by the U.S. public. And I don't know if it was in response. I can't remember specifically. He says it in the film. But if it was in response to the creation of the Air Force from the Army, and so you're going to have a division that's obviously, when the Air Force was created, everybody knows that they're the guys who fly the jets or the planes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Nimitz was like, yeah, but we in the Navy also fly them.
I think that's the implication I got. It's a pretty short little snippet where they mention that. They don't really go into detail.
Right.
But yeah, I got the implication they were like, hey, we do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as the air shows, I mean, the Air Force has the Thunderbirds, but it seems like the Navy has this almost, and maybe this is kind of the competition aspect of it, but the Navy almost wants to say, hey, but we fly our planes closer than the Air Force.
Yes. And the implication from this documentary is that they fly their planes closer than anyone in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, the other thing that I was struck by the whole time was this is kind of an evolution of parade ground exercises. And they talk about that before you become a Blue Angel, the closest you would fly is in parade with other people, but it's still farther than the Blue Angels fly. So they're like the elite parade ground. But like, because back in the day, it was very important to be able to march in lockstep and all those things because troops in the battlefield arrived by marching. So if you were disciplined and you could march well with your neighbors, you'd all arrive as a group, and there was all sorts of benefits.
Get there fast.
Right. So this is kind of the 21st century version of that, where it's not super important to be able to walk in lockstep, even though they do practice that as well. But it is very important to be able to work very tightly with your other fighter jet pilots.
It's a matter of discipline.
Yeah.
And your ability to work as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't go into, I mean, there's a little bit of the personality of the different pilots that they kind of comment on and come through in this movie. But they do talk about how becoming a team and becoming so tightly meshed, they're their own kind of family, as it were.
Yeah.
And I think that's true generally about the military and in general, broadly speaking, but even within these special groups within the military where they have this specific task and they have to be training together, getting to know each other. I thought it was interesting that when they are interviewing potential pilots to bring
future Blue Angels.
Yeah, to bring onto the team for the next year or whatever, how when they were bringing them in to evaluate them and then they would, as a group, talk about them and everything like that, and basically, dig into who they were as an individual. They said everything that was said in there was left in there, as it were, like behind closed doors, never to come out because it was protected in a sense, because they're really digging down into who each person is, because each person has to fit so cohesively into this team that they're building.
So they need that time where they can be incredibly honest. And then they also have to be able to work as a team.
Right. And it's not about one man. I think that really came through in many different ways in this movie. I think that how it starts with Boss, the lead.
The number one.
The number one.
Yeah.
The number one is on his jet. Yeah.
He's kind of the leader, the boss. It starts with him and telling kind of his story and how he was in the Blue Angels. But I think what's fascinating is to go through, it's his last season.
Yeah.
And then so he's going to be having to be involved in picking the next leader, and they kind of go through that and stuff. But the seamlessness in which they move from each year or each season, where the Blue Angels, for the essence of the Blue Angels remains like unmoved or unchanged, even though there's always kind of pilots that are coming in each season and others that are retiring out of it, to the point where I guess they highlighted this just to show how the Blue Angels is bigger than any one individual pilot.
Yeah.
And on that last show, as they're doing the last show, their names are being removed from the office doors where they're, where they're no longer going to be inhabiting. And the new guys that have been chosen, names are being put up.
So it's seamless.
It's just like this. Yeah. And I thought that was really kind of a cool insight into duty, service, the purpose of the whole thing is greater than any one individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a ever-present culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was struck by all the team building exercises you see little glimpses of. One right at the beginning is when they're having their meeting where they review, the tape, the footage of their practice sessions. When they're talking, they start with "Happy to be here, boss,"
Yeah.
and there's a few other just jargon things
They have
they've
their
got
own
memorized.
language.
Yeah. When boss is first speaking at the beginning of the movie, you can hardly understand it.
I know. It's like, what are you saying?
Yeah. And then when they finish it, they do this and
Yeah.
bump fists.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of a little bit corny in one respect, but when you're doing something that serious, when you really do need to rely on these guys when they are 2 feet away from being able to accidentally kill you, it makes sense. It's useful. And it's something that I was just thinking, man, it would be great if we could figure out how to transfer that team building, team thinking aspect to more Americans.
Well, I think that's the idea of putting forth this pinnacle example. I think it's a lead by example ethos. Look, this is excellence. This is what we stand for. This is the top. And you want to come do this too?
Yeah. Too bad we're all a little bit too old to be fighter pilots now.
Yeah. Well, I thought but the highlight on this is special and excellent. So there's only a few people ever will fulfill these roles.
Yeah.
And that's important and that's to be expected. And those who then therefore are chosen to do it, their attitude through it is not one of entitlement, but one of kind of humility through it, because they realize, this is few people get to do what I'm doing.
Yeah. I was the number 2 pilot. So the way they do it is the number 1 pilot's, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong on this, just kind of flying. He's set and this is where we're going.
He's the goose.
He's the
head
lead.
of the
He's the lead.
Yeah.
And then the number 2 frames the set is what they call it, which is where how close they are set to one another.
And the 3 and 4.
So if the number 2 arrives and stops at the wrong position, then it's going to, propagate to the number 3 and the number 4. And it's not going to be a very good set, or it's going to be a farther apart set than they want or whatever. And I was struck by him, number 2, Cheese, as is his call sign at that time. And he was struck. I just noticed how he said, if there's an error, it's going to be almost always because of me, because they're watching what I do, and I'm the one who has to make this and do it right.
Well, and you see in that, and they kind of focused on it a little bit, but each of them have their own responsibility to make the thing work, which is what a team does, obviously. Yeah. And the focus that they always had on constantly trying to get better and being their own biggest critics, and also learning how to take the criticism, like you were too far out that time. You should have been tighter here. You didn't move out of this quick enough. Those kinds of things, being able to accept that criticism. They said, or after they made mistakes, I thought this was important too. When a pilot made a mistake, they were really eager to see how well they'll recognize it, accept it, and then move on from it, rather than let it mess with them going forward. Sometimes it can be crippling to guys and they can't get over it.
Yeah, it's true.
But they also have to really understand their mistake, and they make sure, because they know they made the mistake when they're flying. At that moment, they're like, oh crap, I messed that up. But then hours later, after they've landed and they've made it into the office room, they're reviewing the tape, and everyone's watching frame by frame, like, see, you did that. And they're like, I know.
Yeah.
But then, they do move on after that. But it's, that's something that would hurt the ego for sure, already knowing you made the mistake and having to watch it with everyone around.
Well, what's fascinating is the reputation of fighter pilots is they are high ego guys. And I think that's probably true, because you have, or maybe a better way of putting it is they're really high on self-confidence, because I think those are the types of guys who you want flying it, who have this kind of sense of almost invincibility. I can do anything.
Sure.
Well, you also have to have the attitude of, I want to be the best.
Right. But you also have to have, at the same time, this level of humility to be able to take correction when you're wrong. And I think that's that combination they have to look for when they're interviewing these pilots, and for this to bring them in as part of this group. And I thought that was really interesting to see. I mean, I was kind of thinking a little bit, because they're showing these powerful jets doing these really cool things. And you know, you can't help but think like Top Gun or something where you're seeing, you know, what these jets could do.
Cue Highway to the Danger Zone.
Right. And I'm thinking in that movie that highlighted it was more competition within, whereas the Blue Angels aren't competing against one another. You know, they're learning how to work together as a team to put on the best show they can.
Well, except for kind of, they touched on this a little bit, the 5th and the 6th.
The solos.
Yeah, they're a little bit more competing with everyone else to try and steal the show, kind of.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think they kind of played with that a bit. But when you're talking about the Top Gun, which is also Navy, that is competition between pilots. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're going to be. I think there's probably a little bit more genuine kind of like, I don't know if it's animosity, but there's definitely probably
there's a competition.
Element of where they're going to try to one up each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't fly fighter jets, unfortunately. That'd be very cool. But I do play board games. And frankly, when I play board games, the competition in me, I'm ruthless.
Fighter jets, board games.
I'm talking about competition. There's a metaphor here. Okay. There's a reasonable analogy here. But you know, I don't play around. When I play a board game, I'm play to win. And if it hurts your feelings, well, that sucks. We'll be friends afterwards. But while we're playing, I'm trying to beat you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're talking about with the Top Gun as well, where, you know.
Yeah, I think there's going to be that. And because they're, you know, at least if the movies are any indication as to what the kind of attitudes may be like, that there's probably is some one-upsmanship and some aggressiveness that is just going to come out because they're trying to show who's the best.
You know, earlier you mentioned Thomas, how the birth of the Blue Angels was kind of like, hey, remember, we're a thing. This next observation I have is kind of piggybacks off of that. I didn't know this, but they always have a Marine Corps officer as one of the pilots. And I think that is really cool because the Marine Corps is often, you know, underrepresented in those areas. And to become a Marine Corps aviator is a pretty rare thing.
Well, it is the smallest aviation branch within the branches, I guess.
Right. So, you know, to have them, of course, there's a part of the Navy, and the Navy and the Marine Corps are very closely aligned, have been forever. But I thought that was really interesting piece of information that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then just a little anecdote on that, my personal life. It made me think of a fellow I used to know, or I was acquainted with, Pete O'Hare. He ran an outfit called the Museum of Flight. I hung out with them, I guess you could say. And their whole idea is bringing American aviation, military aviation, and history to the public. And so they're a flying museum. They have aircraft that are operated and fly all the time.
Okay.
Pete was a Marine Corps aviator.
Wow. Okay.
And I just remember thinking how cool it was to meet a guy like him, because that is kind of a rare thing to meet a Marine Corps aviator. And the second I saw that in the Blue Angel, it made me think of Pete. Rest in peace. You know, he passed away recently, but really cool guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, I was constantly, just the whole movie, I was just thinking about the fact, and I touched on this earlier, but the amount of money America flexes with by doing these things, like a flying museum.
Yeah.
Like where we just have casually World War II. Like when I was on vacation earlier this year, you speculated I was on Mars. I wasn't.
Right.
I wish. I saw some World War II fighter plane. I couldn't identify it because I was just driving by it, but it was just sitting at an airport where I was, privately owned or something, most likely. And I was just like, that's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And
super cool.
And, you know, with these fighter jets that we practice on, the U.S. military practices on, we put hundreds of hours. Sometimes we run fighter jets into the ground without them ever seeing combat, just so that our pilots are the best in the world. And that's something a lot of other countries can't afford to do. If they get their hands on a big fancy fighter jet, they have to save it for when there's combat, which means their pilots aren't very well trained, at least on that platform.
Yeah. That's a good observation.
Yeah.
Well, that's the reason why we have air superiority.
That is America's big thing in terms of air combat, is air superiority.
Yeah. And I would argue one of the chief reasons why we own the world from a military might standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. The Air Force and the Navy, for sure. And this The Blue Angels is both.
Yeah, in this case, yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking up just because I was curious, and I've been following some social media guys. One guy named Alex Hollings who talks on all sorts of military stuff, and just he's an expert, and so he talks about Russia's new fighter jets and stuff. And another guy called Habitual Line Crosser, and these are guys who have been service members and they really know their stuff. And so I've been learning a lot just from watching their very entertaining, very funny videos lots of times. And they've been talking about all the different 5th generation fighter jets all over the world. And apparently Russia has the Su-57, we call it the Felon. And so far, 2 of those have been deployed in the world.
Wow.
Well, maybe 2 twice. So it could have been 4 total in Syria. And that's pretty much the only time they've seen combat.
Not even in Ukraine.
Not even in Ukraine that we know of. I guess it could have happened, but I haven't heard of it.
How many do they have?
Well, that's the thing. They claim they want to have like 168 or something by 2028, and they claim they've got a certain number built, like 20 or something around there. And if you really pay attention to every time they've actually released official information on them, you can only really confirm maybe 4 or 5, possibly 6 if you include like a practice one. And that's all they've built. And it just really drives home to me that, at least in terms of air combat, the U.S. is peerless. And there's never, of course, been anyone else with the kind of air superiority the U.S. has. And this whole movie, that's what I was thinking. I was just like, goodness gracious. We're just flexing so hard.
Well, it's an awesome reminder, too, to tell the American people, hey, look, this is who we are. And, of course, we show the rest of the world that when we display things like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds or any of the elite, I guess, teams of military, what is it, exposition. But first and foremost, it's telling the American people, this is who we are as a people, and you should be proud of that. Yeah. And you should also take comfort in that, knowing that we've got your back and we're going to keep things safe here at home and abroad.
On that exact note, I was thinking about this the other night. I think probably many Americans who don't have faith in God would probably, if you really could drive them to the point, realize they have some kind of similar faith in the U.S. military, which is that whatever the natural disaster is, what would happen. Eventually they're going to come to, well, the U.S. military will show up and solve that problem. And that's not totally invalid. The U.S. military is a most incredible fighting force. But I think the important thing is the military can't protect Americans if Americans aren't willing to support the military and don't have the will for the military to do its job.
Yeah, that's a sobering observation and an important one to make.
Right. And we've been seeing it in Israel is the West does not have the will for Israel to resolve the issue with Hamas that was made clear on October 7th.
Yeah.
And that's just foolish because they need to. And so we need to remember on our own, if it ever comes to it again, that the U.S. is engaged in a large-scale war. We have to have the will for our military to do its job and win a war. And war is ugly. It's just factually ugly.
I would say, of all the things that my tax dollars are used for, that's probably one of the only ones that I don't mind.
Agreed.
Well, we wouldn't be here without them.
No.
Exactly, yeah.
No, I mean, if you have a safe commute home today and then eat a nice hot meal and enjoy the relative safety of your living room and then can go out and enjoy your family on the weekend and go to a baseball game, whatever, and not have bombs raining down upon you. That's why.
Yeah, thank the U.S. Navy and Army and Marine Corps, et cetera, and Air Force. All right, I named all the rest. Coast Guard and Space Force too. Thank you, guys.
Space Force!
Yes.
So just kind of moving on to more of America's dominance in terms of aircraft and where I think the future is going. So in the war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of drone combat now.
Yeah.
And there was actually, I think it was last year, some Australian-made cardboard drones were being flown by Ukraine. And apparently they don't give a radar return because they're cardboard.
That's crazy. Are they using them just for reconnaissance or do they carry a payload?
They used them to take out at least some targets, I believe.
What?
Yeah.
So they dropped some type of munition.
Well, and that's the thing. That's kind of where the war in Ukraine has gotten to at this point, is so much of it is drone combat.
Yeah.
And I was reading about this and how the Russians have jammers that they try to use to, keep the drone from getting the signal to drop the grenade or whatever it is that they're trying to protect themselves from. And apparently the Russians were complaining their jammers don't work, which is not great for them.
Yeah.
But that's what's happening a lot, is a drone will fly overhead. There's a camera pointing down, some guy piloting the drone somewhere, and he's just like pushes a button and a grenade drops on a dude's head.
Yeah.
And so combat, because of drones, which I didn't see coming, has changed yet again in a way that it did, I would say, in World War I or World War II.
I saw a video of this young guy who's a Ukrainian drone pilot. It's probably the most cyberpunk thing I've ever seen in my life. And like, for real.
Yeah.
He has this like crazy earring, but he's wearing a military uniform. And you could tell prior to the conflict, he was like a hacker nerd guy.
Yeah.
100%. But he's like a really cool guy. I think he even has long hair. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you do what you got to do. It's wartime.
Yeah.
But he has these goggles, for first person view.
Yeah.
And he's piloting these things. And in this particular episode, they were hunting other drone pilots on the Russian side.
Oh. Wow.
And so they're hunting drone outposts with their drones. And it was crazy. It was wild.
I think the difference with when you have, broadly speaking, like an Air Force like we do, which of course we have drones and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're pointing to is actually localized drone kind of warfare, which is small time drones. Like when you say cardboard drones, I mean,
Right.
What I'm envisioning is the kind of the drones that you might see flying around your neighborhood with somebody, like filming. That I think is an interesting adaptation or development within warfare that we've never seen, I guess, to the scale that we're seeing it in Ukraine. But I think it's also probably you need clear battle lines and stuff like that for it to be more of a constant versus, if you're doing warfare where you're moving miles, the battle lines are moving rapidly and fast or something like that, probably less. But I could see when it bogs down to some type of, trench warfare type stuff.
Which is where Ukraine roughly is.
Yeah. Then the drones could be really almost probably the biggest annoyance, fear out there for soldiers. Because if you just have this, who knows if, little drone flying over your head, dropping a bomb right on top of your, just big enough to blow you up.
Right. That's what I was thinking about, is you take cover behind a brick wall or whatever, and you also have to look up now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just the only safe direction is down.
Right. On the subject of drones, and as it relates pointing back towards air power, have you heard much about the next generation fighter pilot or the next generation fighter jets that may incorporate multiple drones?
Yeah. So this is, those guys I mentioned, this is where I learned this from. So America is working on a 6th generation fighter. So currently we have pretty much the world's only really 5th generation fighters, which is the F-22, which is made for air-to-air combat, so against other fighters, and the F-35, which is multi-role, but more for air-to-ground and for stealth. Mm-hmm. And so we are already, the F-22 is called our air superiority fighter, and in the very limited combat it's seen, it's never really had a challenger in any sense. And so we're already working on our 6th gen. It's called the NGAD for short, Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter. And it was rumored we were going to get an actual name released last month in May. Didn't happen, obviously. But presumably that will be soon.
Is that a name for a prototype, or?
That's kind of the name we call it because we don't have a real name.
Okay, but they're working on a prototype still.
It's already flown.
So they have a prototype.
Yeah, they have a prototype at the very least. I don't know, exactly all the steps because I'm not a military guy. I'm just a hobbyist.
It's got to cost cops some money.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah,
Thanks,
so this
taxpayers.
thing is going to have all the, fanciest electronic warfare stuff, which involves things like just jamming out basically electronic signals. So light, essentially different forms of light, so that missiles can't guide themselves in and stuff like that. And it's also going to be incredibly stealthy because we've gotten to the point where we're not going to build jets that aren't stealthy anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're the plan currently is to introduce, I think it's a suite of 3 drone fighters that will accompany every human manned fighter. So it'll be 1 human and 4 fighters, basically. And I could be wrong. It could be 5 total. And that's the plan. And it's going to be rolled out with the NGAD and then also with the F-35 probably before the NGAD.
So when you say 4 or 5 drone fighters with a pilot, so I assume they'll effectively be similar aircraft to whatever this 6th gen aircraft is.
Yeah.
But they just fly kind of like in tandem with it and then can work almost like multiple attack platforms that one pilot effectively is controlling.
Yeah. The way I've been picturing it, and I could be wrong, is basically something like the Blue Angels.
Yeah.
But it's 1 human and 3 or 4 robots.
Yeah. And they'll fly in.
And there's very different kinds of drones. They're all the same word, but these kind of drones are more like an actual fighter jet.
Yeah.
Whereas the cardboard drone I mentioned looks like a World War I, fixed wing. You launch it and it just kind of glides kind of thing. That's what that looks like. I saw some pictures. And then there's also just like the drones you have at home.
Yeah.
Where it's,
quadcopter kind of
quadcopter or whatever.
6,
yeah. And even that could be weaponized pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, there's plethora of evidence from Ukraine and the modification of civilian equipment into weapons.
So yeah, air combat in the future is going to be wild.
Yeah.
And the other thing is drone swarms, which will be, I guess, smaller, presumably, but just so many of them that it's like a cloud of deadly things flying at you.
That's kind of terrifying, frankly.
Yeah. It is costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So do you want to talk about, back to the subject of elite groups of military, we've just touched on drones, kind of back to our original topic of the Blue Angels.
Yeah.
How there are multiple units throughout branches of the military that even go beyond the aviation side of things. So like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Right. Tomb Guards.
Or the Golden Knights, it's the jump team for the for the Army. I just think it's so cool that we maintain these for all kinds of activity.
Oh, yeah.
To show the public the ethos of the American military and the American people.
And the capability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, capability, but like with the Tomb Guards, that's the honor and respect of for the soldier who's willing to die for his country.
In a place where he's never going to be identified.
Right.
Yeah.
And just making sure that soldier is honored in that. I think currently at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington, I think there's three unknown soldiers entombed there. I'm not sure about that, but if you've never seen the changing of the guard,
that's incredible.
Yeah,
more precision.
Yeah, go and see it. It is, and they're there 24 hours a day
in all kinds of weather,
365 days a year.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and we haven't mentioned the Thunderbirds, which is the Air Force's kind of equivalent of the Blue Angels. They don't really fly as close though, so is that a cool?
I've seen them fly here in town at least once, and I've seen the Blue Angels fly 2 times.
I've seen the Blue Angels once as a kid.
Yeah,
I got one of those. It looks like a yield sign, but it says Blue Angels Crossing, and it's got a picture of the angels on it. And
that's
so
cool.
I had that up in my room from that event onward.
I love it. Yeah, I think that they came in the early 2000s. There were a handful of air shows during that period of time. It got less and less after 9/11.
Yeah.
And then they also came for the Chattanooga Fallen 5.
I don't think I've ever seen an air show.
Oh, wow.
If you have not seen an air show, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I think someday I'd like to see one.
I think it's one of those things, at least once you should see with your own eyes, just because seeing it on TV is really cool. And this movie was great. And I kind of felt like I was seeing a Blue Angel show, but seeing it for yourself and knowing that this is a real thing that's actually happening and it's not a trick or it's not CGI or whatever. And these people really do these incredible feats where they fly at each other at hundreds of miles an hour and then barely miss and all that crazy stuff it's worth seeing with your own eyes for sure. And if you do it, you're demonstrating support for the U.S. military as well, which is, like we've said earlier, something that is a very good thing to do, at least if you want to be protected by the U.S. military.
Yeah, exactly.
I imagine that the sounds of hearing those fighters fly over has got to be just
it's awesome.
incredible.
yeah.
It is awesome. It like cracks as it goes by, and then the sonic boom. It's super cool. My grandfather was a huge fan of aviation, and we went with him for years and years until he passed, and that was like the highlight of the year.
Yeah.
Was going to watch
Air shows.
with my grandfather. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I've also had the opportunity at the cemetery here in town to see other, military equipment. Like I've seen, I should have looked this up. I don't know the name of it, but it looks like a big truck with a, 18-wheeler load on the back, but then it lifts up and it shoots rockets, whatever those are called.
Oh yeah, HIMARS.
HIMARS, yeah. And I remember as a kid, once I went to see that, they had a few. They had a HIMAR and some other stuff, Humvee for sure. And I was with my cousin who lived 2 hours away, and the guy who was showing it off was like, yeah, this can reach this other town in 6 minutes. So we said, okay, set a timer. And then we called my cousin's dad and was like, you just got blown up.
I love it.
Yeah. It's very cool if you get the chance to see what equipment the U.S. military works with daily and just really to have a tangible understanding of what it is that keeps us safe and pays the cost of freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you want a prime example, go watch the documentary.
Yes,
Blue Angels.
Go watch the Blue Angels documentary. And the other thing just worth mentioning is that the Blue Angels can't do it without their support aircraft, Fat Albert.
I love Fat Albert, the C-130.
C-130 Hercules, yeah.
Yeah, it's got those booster rockets.
It's just a chonkin chonkin plane.
I've seen Fat Albert take off from level field.
Oh wow.
And with the booster rocket, so it's like just taking off normally, and then it just turns into a rocket ship and goes vertical practically.
It's so crazy.
I'm pretty sure they also shot flares out from the C-130 and looked like this huge like angel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was super cool.
I can see shots of that.
Yeah. My cousin in the Air Force worked with more that side, the logistical aircraft side of the U.S. military. And that's another thing that's worth mentioning because we do that better than anyone else in the world. Even the pullout from Afghanistan, which we call the surrender and retreat appropriately, because that's what it was. We moved how many hundreds of thousands of people over a weekend?
Yeah.
And no one else in the world can do that. It's just the U.S. And yeah, I just, sue me. I'm a U.S. military fan.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we've kind of talked ourselves out on this topic, I think.
Go watch the Netflix Blue Angels.
The Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Or go see an air show yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We've talked about Blue Angels. We've talked about kind of some of U.S. military capabilities, just what we appreciated about the movie. Yeah, it's worth watching, and the U.S. military is worth supporting. I think that's our message.
Agreed. That is our message. Take it to the bank.
Yeah. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. And hey, leave us a comment if you like what we do. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.